Island Vacation. Alpha Mated Book 2, A Werewolf Shifter Romance. Written by Flynn. 1. The day started like any other. With a ring on the doorbell, and a dead body at my feet. Okay, maybe it wasn't that normal, but that's how it started. The day after my short initiation into the paranormal world dawned, I woke up in my our bed and stretched my arms over my head. Beside me was the most handsome and unconscious werewolf mate I'd ever seen. Not that I'd seen a lot. One was enough for me. David Dives was completely unconscious, and there was a stupid, adorable grin on his lips. The sheets didn't cover his upper half, and showed that nothing else did either. I myself was clothed in well sheets, and a pillow that somehow had migrated to my feet. The bright rays of sunlight behind the thick curtains told me it was past 10 in the morning. The clock on the nightstand confirmed it. There was a distinct chill in the air, and the dead fireplace told me why. My stomach gurgled. Time for some munchies before I tried out a werewolf delicacy. I slipped out of bed and dressed myself in my few changes of clothes. I'd have to ask where the laundromat was around here before David rejoiced in my newest suit, my birthday one. I tiptoed out of the room and down the stairs. The large house was quiet, but the sunlight through the many windows gave it a cheery atmosphere. I just reached the bottom of the stairs when the bell rang. I grasped the banner and leaned forward to look left and right into the adjoining rooms. Pure was nowhere to be found. I shrugged and walked across the entrance hall to the front doors. There was no peephole, so I opened one of them. And in slumped a body. A man's body, to be precise. He was about 45 with grey streaks in his temples, and a complexion that made albinos look like lumps of charcoal. The guy wore an overcoat that covered most of his body, and a faint breath of steam rose from beneath the coat. I stooped and shook the man. "You okay?" His body was stiff. I grabbed his wrist where lay a gold watch and froze. The color in my face drained to the same complexion as him. There was no pulse. I yelped and dropped his wrist. His arm slapped onto the floor like a wet rag. Hurried footsteps caught my attention, and I turned to see Pure emerge from the left wing. He started, and his eyes widened as they fell on the stiff man. The shock was only momentary, and he rushed forward and knelt beside me. "Help me get him into the great room," he pleaded. "I think it's a little late for that," I quipped. "Not quite, but if you would assist me," he insisted. I shrugged, and Pure and I both grabbed an arm. The man's stiff body slid easily across the smooth wood floor to the right-hand wing. The room was wide and stretched to the back of the house. An arrangement of couches and chairs sat at the front, and in the rear was a pool table and some bookcases. On the opposite wall from the double-door entrance, and in the center was a mammoth fireplace. Pure helped me guide the man to the spot between the coffee table and one of the couches, and he dropped his arm. I was happy to follow his example, and released the clammy skin. Steam continued to float from beneath the man's coat, and I noticed his face looked a little sunburned. I leaned down and squinted. My eyes widened when I saw it was more than just a rash. It was a flat-out burn on his cheeks. Lots of them. Tiny little pockets of burned flesh like chicken pox, but a little more permanent. Pure hurried from one window to the other, closing the thick curtains. Soon the room was enveloped in shadow so dark I could hardly see my hand in front of my face. The guy spread out on the floor in front of me, however, stood out like a groupie at a Christian revival meeting. He also opened his eyes. I yelped and scrambled backwards as the man dead just moments before sat up. His whitish eyes swept over the room, but didn't seem to take in anything around him. He rubbed his burned cheeks and winced when his hands stuck in the holes. His lips were chapped and his voice was hoarse. Where am I?" Pure knelt beside him and set his hands on the man's shoulders. The smoke from before no longer floated from his overcoat. "You're at the residence of Mr. Dives, Lord Basilius." The stranger dropped his hand and frowned.
I remember now. I must speak with your master, Pure.
He tried to stand, but his shaky legs buckled beneath him. Pure caught him and leaned the man's body against his. Pure steered him onto the couch and stepped back.
Perhaps you should sit here while I go fetch him.
Basilius leaned back and nodded.
Yes, that would be wise.
Pure bowed to him.
I'll return in a moment. And away her hurried.
The man's strange colored eyes fell on me, and he raised an eyebrow.
I don't believe I know your face.
I gave him a nervous smile and took a step back.
And no, I don't believe we've met.
I would have remembered a face like his, burned holes or not. The man grasped the arm of the couch with one hand and stood. His ghoulish eyes never left me, and his voice took on a stern quality.
Do you know who I am? I shook my head. No, and I'll be happy to forget the acquaintance if you want me to.
He used the couch as a crutch as he slowly stalked towards me. Those pale eyes narrowed, and I noticed two of his upper teeth peek out from his lip.
Who are you? What's your business here? I held up my hands in front of me and backed up towards the open doors. I'm nobody.
Just a resident.
I'm a resident of the house. Just hanging around until my back hit a hard surface. I yelped and spun around. I found myself eye level with a clothed chest that belonged to David.
He looked down at me and grinned.
You're jumpy this morning, he teased.
I slipped around him and peeked around his body at the pale guest.
The man stood at the end of the couch.
His whitish eyes were still on me, as he nodded in my direction.
Who is she? He asked David.
David chuckled and stepped aside before he gestured to me.
Miss Dakota Combes, allow me to introduce you to Mr. Blake Basilius.
Blake, this is Miss Combes, my mate. The pale man straightened and raised an eyebrow.
Is she really?
David shrugged. So it seems, but what's more important is what you're doing not only away from your home, but out during the day.
I see you've got some sun pains for the effort.
Blake reached up and brushed his fingers against the scorch holes.
This is nothing compared to the trouble brewing on my island.
David frowned.
What kind of trouble?
Blake lowered himself onto the couch and gestured to the couch opposite him.
If you would be seated, I will tell you what I know.
2. David gently took my arm and guided me over to the couch where we took our seats. Blake leaned forward with his arms on his legs and cleared his throat.
As you know, I don't often leave my island.
David nodded.
Yes. I don't remember hearing you ever leave it in my lifetime.
Blake pursed his lips.
That's true.
The last time I left the island was to escape a pack of particularly amorous and ugly witches. This time, however, the situation is more dire, and perhaps more ugly.
I'm sure you heard about the murder that took place on the island a few months ago.
David raised an eyebrow.
I had heard something about it, but I thought the mystery was solved.
Blake clasped his hands together and stared down at his long fingernails.
It was, but there were a few unknown consequences.
One of those was that a spell was left partially cast, and I believe someone tried to finish the spell and bungled it horribly. David leaned back and shrugged.
I'm a werewolf, not a warlock. What can I do to help you with a spell?
Blake raised his eyes and they stared into David's.
The bungled spell was aimed at you.
My mate frowned.
What kind of spell was it?
Blake sat back and shook his head.
The spell was so poorly cast that we haven't deciphered the purpose, though Madam Bentley is still trying to figure it out.
David snorted.
You trust that hag to? A warning glance from Blake silenced him.
She is unusual, but she is one of the most competent witches I have ever seen, Blake insisted. David held up his hand.
Okay, I get it, but you haven't answered my question. What can I do?
Madam Bentley desires that you visit the island in the hopes that your presence will write the spell, and we can identify its intent, Blake explained. David frowned.
So what you're telling me is you want me to go to your island and hex myself?
Blake smiled.
Something of the sort.
Will you come? David snorted.
Does anyone have a choice when the leader of the vampires calls them?
My eyes widened, and I whipped my head to Blake. His sly smile widened and he shrugged.
There is always a choice, but the outcome will always be to my benefit.
David sighed and turned to me.
What do you say?
Are you up for a short vacation?
I looked to him and blinked. I have no idea what's going on, and you want me to say yes?
David patted my hand and returned his attention to Blake.
Could you give us a few minutes to catch up? And I would advise you to pack some change of clothes, Blake added. Madam Bentley is competent, but not necessarily fast.
David smiled.
The same old Madam Bentley.
He pulled me to my feet and walked us over to the open doors.
Pure.
The manservant emerged from across the entrance hall and walked over to us. David jerked his head over his shoulder in the direction of the guest. Could you get Lord Basilius a bottle of our best blood? I whipped my head to David's face.
Blood.
Pure bowed his head.
As you wish.
David directed me towards the stairs, but I grabbed his arm and pulled us to a stop.
Blood.
Witches.
What the hell is going on?
David's eyes flickered over his shoulder towards the entrance to the great room.
I'll explain upstairs.
My curiosity ate away at me as he led me upstairs to our shared room. The fire burned brightly in the hearth, and a comfortable warmth flooded the room. David set me down on the foot of the bed and stepped back to stand in front of me. He folded his arms and cupped his chin in one hand as he furrowed his brow.
You obviously know that werewolves exist. I snorted. Yeah, we've pretty much established that. And I have told you that there's an entire world of the paranormal out there, he added. I raised an eyebrow but nodded. Yeah. He dropped his arms and shrugged. Then that's it. That's all you need to know.
My face fell and I narrowed my eyes.
That doesn't tell me anything. He smiled. On the contrary, my little lovebird, it tells you everything you need to know. He took a seat beside me and smiled.
Did you read many myths and legends as a child? I nodded.
A few.
I can tell you with only a few reservations that they all held a large grain of truth, he told me.
I snorted. Even the ones with tiny men who made wooden shoes. He shrugged.
Okay, maybe not all of them, but those that involved witches, vampires, and the handsome werewolves had some kernel of truth.
I furrowed my brow and pointed at the floor. So what you're trying to tell me in this really long way is there's a vampire downstairs who has a witch on his payroll and wants you, a werewolf, to go to his island.
David thought over my question a moment before he nodded.
Yeah, pretty much that. I frowned. And you can't refuse him because he'll what?
Drain you dry and use your fur to make a coat. David smiled.
Something like that, and it isn't very good politics to cross Blake Basilius. Why not?
I persisted. David stood and half turned to me. Because he happens to be the leader of all the vampires in the world.
I blinked at him. Seriously.
My mate sighed and ran a hand through his short hair.
Well, self-professed leader, and anybody who's argued the point has ended up 6 feet under if they can be found at all.
Blake's very old, very rich, and very dangerous. Saying no when he asks you to dance is playing with death.
He flashed me a grin. Not that he's asked me, but I'd say yes to save face. Possibly literally. And this witch? She's really a witch? I asked him.
David snorted.
Madam Bentley has power, and a lot of senility with it.
She's been working the casting trade so long she really has forgotten her age, and so has everyone else. A knock on the door made us both jump.
Sir.
Pure called through the entrance. David turned towards the door.
What is it? Lord Basilius wishes to have your answer. I stood. You can tell Count Dracula we're going. Just give us a bit to pack.
Oh, and call my office and tell them I might not be in for a few days. Say something about a sick grandma or somebody.
Wait a sec.
David yelled.
He turned and grasped my shoulders.
His eyes searched mine.
This trip's a little more serious than a short jaunt to Cotio's store. You don't have to go if you don't want to. I snorted. And let you have all the fun with the Count Chocula and his mad medium.
No way. We're both going, or we're both staying and getting our blood drained. End of story. David's sly grin slipped onto his lips. He leaned down and captured mine in a quick, passionate kiss. I barely had time to register the delicious heat of lust before we broke apart.
All right, you win, David told me.
He glanced over his shoulder at the door.
Tell Blake we'll be down in 5 and get him an umbrella.
I don't want him to get fined for smoking in a non-smoking area. 3. We packed a few sets of clothes in a handy suitcase David owned and walked downstairs. Blake met us at the bottom of the stairs. In one hand was a black umbrella. David stopped and looked him over.
I'm guessing you didn't come here in a car.
Blake glanced down at himself and smiled. On the contrary, I was driven to within 2 blocks of your fine home, but I thought to enter on foot to avoid any prying eyes. David grinned.
Then I'll have Pure drive us to your car. It's not very pleasant sitting next to a half-charred vampire.
Blake chuckled.
No, I imagine for a werewolf the smell would be highly unpleasant.
Pure fetched David's car and we stepped outside. Blake made use of the umbrella for the short distance to the vehicle, and avoided more face ventilation. I sat beside David in the darkened limo, while Blake took the seat opposite us. In the darkness, Blake's eyes took on a red tinge.
I must have been looking a little too hard before his red eyes fell on me. Am I that interesting? I shrugged. Sort of.
You're the first bloodsucker I've ever met.
He chuckled. Do I meet your expectations? You're fatter than I thought you'd be.
David couldn't stifle the loud snort that exuded from his nostrils. Blake shot him a red-eyed glare that could have melted steel. David composed himself and coughed into his hand.
She got you with that one, Blake.
Blake turned up his patrician nose and narrowed his eyes at the werewolf beside me.
Don't let your inexperienced mate let you forget who I am.
I leaned to the side so I was in the line of fire between the 2 men, and glared at Blake.
Don't forget this inexperienced mate helped drag you out of the sun.
Next time, I just might leave you there to cook a little longer, until you're a bit more tender.
He raised an eyebrow. Are you threatening me? I shook my head. No. Just giving you some good advice about carrying an umbrella when you're so rude to people. Maybe a stake-proof vest would help too.
Blake tilted his head to one side and a smooth smile slipped onto his pale lips. His eyes flickered to David.
You've chosen a very brash young woman as your mate. And slightly insane, David added as he grabbed my shoulders and set me back firmly into my seat. She really needs to learn that I'm not the big fish in the paranormal pond.
I whipped my head to him and crossed my arms over my chest.
Were you neutered while I slept?
David's mouth dropped open. Blake laughed.
The strange sound echoed in the car. She seems to have trapped your speech with her poisoned tongue.
David glanced from Blake to me.
I know I don't pay attention to my business that often, but I think I missed an important memo somewhere that read it was the day to gang up on me.
Blake glanced out the window and clasped his umbrella between his hands.
Hopefully we will find who is your greatest enemy when we arrive on the island. The car stopped and we stepped out.
A long jet-black limo awaited us. The driver was a pale man of 50 with dark, puffy eyes and the humor of a funeral. He opened the rear door and shuffled aside.
To whom, Famil? Blake ordered before he ducked into the car.
The pale man stiffly bowed his head. David followed Blake and I brought up the rear. I paused by the door and glanced at Famil. His dark eyes stared back at me without any emotion. I gave him a shaky smile and hurried into the car. My rush meant my foot caught on the bottom of the entrance, and I tumbled headfirst into the near total darkness. A pair of strong arms caught me and pulled me sideways into a familiar lap. David's chuckling voice broke the silence. "Another trip like that and I'm going to insist on carrying you everywhere," he warned me. I squirmed in his hold and ended up dropping onto the floor in front of Blake's black shoes. The vampire stared down at me with his amused red eyes. "Those who laugh last laugh loudest." I glared at him and opened my mouth to snap some witty comeback, but something caught my attention. That something was a small greyish mole stuck into the seam between the sole of his shoe and the body. I glanced up at the vampire and nodded at his foot. "Your foot's got a wart in it." He frowned and lifted his foot. His eyes widened as he beheld the small grey mole. He pinched the wart between two long fingernails and extracted the round object. The vampire tilted it and his eyebrows crashed down. David looked from the mole to Blake's tense face. "What is it?" "A tracking mechanism of some sort," Blake replied. He pinched the wart and there was an audible crunch of metal. "It seems someone wishes to follow my movements." David frowned. "Maybe a witch." Blake pocketed the remains of the tracker and pursed his lips. "Or someone involved with the matter and not allied with us." He pursed his lips. "This is very unfortunate. I thought to bring you to my island under cover of darkness, but now it appears your sole source of safety has vanished." A sly smirk slipped onto David's lips. "You forget I'm a werewolf, Blake. I don't die so easily." Blake nodded at me. "And what of your mate?" I crossed my arms and glared at him. "The mate can take care of herself." Blake sighed and looked from one of us to the other. "Then I leave you in the safety of your own hands. However, I know you're acquainted with the island, David, but I believe your bold mate should be warned about its unique features." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what? Exploding candles and walking suits of armor?" Blake smiled. "Those and more, though the most dangerous aspect is the shifting rooms." "Which means memorizing the place is a real pain," David quipped. I glanced from one man to the other, and I use that term loosely. "So is this place something like those kids' books with the wizards and the school, where the staircases moved like the news?" "Every hour on the hour." Blake shook his head. "No. I would better describe the rooms as those in a funhouse mirror. The point of entrance and intention of those who enter decides the makeup of the room." David leaned against the back of the seat and folded his arms. "So is it true if a burglar climbs in through a window, he finds himself at the bottom of a gator pit?" Blake chuckled. "Nothing so plebeian, I assure you. The creatures in the bottom of the pit are imported crocodiles from the Nile." I held up a hand. "Wait a sec. I still don't get these rooms." David grinned. "What Blake's trying to say is don't go into a room with intentions to steal his stuff. Otherwise you'll end up the main course for his exotic pets." Blake bowed his head. I could not have put it more succinctly myself. I furrowed my brow. If this place is so safe, then how did the spell get cast by an amateur? The vampire pursed his pale lips together and looked away from us. "That remains to be seen, but I suspect a staff member may have assisted them." David frowned. "I don't like where this is headed." "So you're saying we might have two people to worry about? A witch and one of your own guys, who probably already hacked your footwear." Blake returned his gaze to us and bowed his head. "Precisely." David kept his attention on Blake, but jerked his head towards me. "If there's trouble, how fast can you get her off the island?" "Within minutes," Blake assured him. I glared at David. "I'm not going anywhere without you." Blake chuckled. "Spoken like a true mate." David searched my face and pursed his lips.
You're sure?
I rolled my eyes.
Are you a werewolf?
A crooked smile slipped onto his lips.
Yes and yes.
4. The limo took us to the port, but not the commercial area. We parked at the ramp in the private bays that housed the yachts and motorboats. Several of the boats cost more than a block's worth of residential housing. The white-painted bays with their covered ports glistened in the bright sun. Blake stepped out and unfurled his umbrella to shade himself against the harsh light.
He half turned to me and smiled. Have you ever had the pleasure of yachting on the bay? I shook my head. No. I don't exactly have a firstborn to barter for that trip.
David leaned towards me and lowered his voice.
We could change that.
I rolled my eyes and pushed him away.
Get your mind out of the gutter and onto the boat.
I glanced at the dozens of private fishing boats and yachts, and turned to Blake.
Which one is your boat?
He looked past me and nodded.
That one. I turned and followed his gaze.
His eyes pointed at the largest yacht in the fleet. The ship rose 100 feet out of the water, and had a deck larger than my former apartment. The enclosed observation deck was the size of a small mansion and several floors tall. A steering cabin topped the structure. A large rear hatch was backed up to a drawbridge-type dock, and I noticed the limo pulled around and drove into the ship through that entrance.
I folded my arms and frowned. Compensating for something.
David grasped my shoulders and pulled me towards the vessel.
Let's get aboard before the captain decides we're a little too much trouble to be worth more than half the trip across the bay. Besides, there's something I want to show you.
He pulled me down the boardwalk and over to the railed gangplank that led onto the fine ship, and Blake followed close behind. A man in a white uniform and stiff hat stood near the railing.
He bowed to us. Good morning, my lord.
Good morning, Mr. Dives. My eyes flickered to David.
Does everyone know you? He grinned and shrugged. I'm a popular guy.
The man in white chuckled.
You are certainly something, Mr. Dives, but I'm not sure I'd call you popular.
Blake moved to stand close beside the man in white.
If you're done with your jokes, Captain Marius, perhaps you'll prepare the ship to depart.
Captain Marius stood at attention and stared straight ahead.
Aye, my lord.
All preparations have been made. We only await your order. Blake nodded.
You have it.
Captain Marius saluted. He spun on his heels and hurried off to a doorway at the rear of the observation deck. The windows around the deck allowed me to see him travel up a flight of stairs to the pilot house at the top.
Your help is getting sassy, David commented.
Blake smiled and shrugged.
What can one do these days?
Corporal punishment is outlawed, and these blasted unions disallow even firing without some justification. David smiled.
Makes you miss the days of flogging and beheading, doesn't it?
Blake half turned away from us and chuckled.
Often. But if you will excuse me, I must rest in my cabin.
He retreated down a flight of stairs at the rear of the ship.
I turned to David. How long does it take to get to the island? He shrugged. About 2 hours, if the weather's good. I was on the ship once during a storm, and it took 5 hours to get there.
I turned and wandered towards the railing at the front of the boat.
So it's that far. He sidled up to my side and shook his head. No, only 30 miles or so, but Avalon Island doesn't quite sit in the middle of the bay.
It's off to one side and close to the cliffs to the southeast of the city. The waves can be strong there after traveling through the open ocean, and they're fond of dashing boats against the rocks.
It's quite a graveyard of ships at the bottom of those cliffs.
We reached the railing and I clasped the metal. David set his arms crossed on the railing and leaned forward. I looked out over the calm waters and enjoyed the fresh breeze that blew over us. Movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention, and I turned my head to find David studying me. A small smile caressed the corners of his lips.
I leaned away from him and frowned. What?
He kept his eyes on me as he shook his head.
Nothing much. I was just admiring the way you looked when you relaxed. You should do it more often. I turned away from him and shrugged. It's not easy being a working girl. But you're not a working girl anymore, he pointed out.
I sensed an argument rising that neither of us would win.
Not today, but wasn't there something you were going to show me?
He leaned down and pecked a light kiss on my lips. A sweet, delicate warmth spread through me, and I regretted when he pulled away. His whispering voice kept up the flames.
You have a way with words, my love.
I shook my head to clear my thoughts and scowled at him.
That doesn't answer my question.
He faced in the direction ahead of us and nodded.
It's that.
I followed his gaze and beheld the open bay to our right, and the tall rocky cliffs to our left.
Between the two was a tiny dot in the distance. Is that the island? He nodded. Yep, Avalon Island. It's got quite the history as a paranormal vortex. I arched an eyebrow. That's what Blake said, but why that place? It looks like Alcatraz Island with less bird poop. He chuckled. That would describe parts of it pretty well, but Blake's fixed the rest of the place pretty nice.
Only the wealthiest of the paranormal world get a chance to view the inside. Some have been waiting quite a few centuries for even a peek. I leaned on the railing beside him.
That doesn't really answer my question.
David shrugged.
I can't because I don't know.
Nobody does.
It's just a magnet for the spooks and shifters of the world. I studied his face. So how do you think that spook tried to curse you? He smiled. That's also a mystery, but hopefully we'll find out soon.
He leaned down and lowered his voice to a whisper. His words brushed against my ear and warmed my body.
But not before we have a little fun. I blushed and pushed him away. Is that all you werewolves think about? He laughed. Quite a bit, but is there anything better to think about? I snorted. Maybe not getting hexed to death. Good point.
The calm seas that greeted us at the port waved a fond farewell to us a few miles out in the bay. The waves colored white as they splashed against one another in ever higher heights. I leaned over the railing and watched the bow of the ship cut into the rolling water. A large wave splashed against the front and blew spray upward. I drew back, but not before I got a faceful of bay water. I turned to David, who grinned back at me. It's a pity you're not wearing a white shirt, he commented. I need to go change. I spun around and marched towards the observation deck. David grabbed my hand.
There's no time. We're almost there.
He nodded at the distance. The island loomed ahead of us. Two long white docks with covered bays greeted us. The large yacht parked in the largest berth that sat closest to the island.
The docks ended at the land where they met a paved road.
The road wound its way up a steep terraced hill littered with boulders, wildflowers and tall softwood trees.
The top was topped with a large fortress-like abode that shattered the endless blue sky above the island.
The walls were a gloomy grey and topped by a parapet. A single stone tower stood at attention at the front left corner.
The tall, thin windows gazed out on the waters with haughty indifference.
A large lawn surrounded the bottom of the walls like a green moat, and I glimpsed a few smaller buildings on the grounds. Another movable bridge dropped at the rear and allowed the car to drive onto the paved road. David and I moved to the gangplank, where Blake and his umbrella joined us. He smiled and swept his arm over the island.
Welcome to my home.
I jerked my head towards the castle. Did you design that, or did you get your friend Dracula as an architect?
He chuckled. Neither.
I worked with an existing foundation and used a more modern architect.
At least 2 centuries ago the man was modern. Now let us go up so you can settle in.
We walked down the plank and over to the car. Famil opened the door, and we slipped inside the darkened vehicle.
The short but steep ride ended, and we stepped out on a large loop with a tree bed situated in the center.
A wooden arch covered the entrance. The front doors were thick slabs of wood with carved scenes of wolves, bats, ornate headstones, and a crescent moon. Blake led the way beneath the arch. The doors opened and we stepped into a large, tall entrance hall. Above us soared the high ceiling with its open rafter layout. The back wall held a long reception desk, and to the right were the stone stairs that led to the higher floors. A passageway to the right of the stairs led to other rooms on the ground floor. To our left and right were wooden archways. The left led to a large dining room, while the right was a sitting room.
We stepped over to the desk.
A man of similar attire to Famil, and the same age and expression, bowed his head to us. Beside him stood a young man of 18 with the complexion of a turnip. The kid wore a bow tie, valet jacket, and dress pants. His black hair was greased back and tucked under a flat bellhop hat. Blake grabbed a large open book and pushed the tome in front of us.
"If you would sign in, we can assign you a room," he told us.
David grabbed a nearby pen and scribbled a few words. I glanced over his shoulder and frowned. My eyes flickered up to him as he set the pen down.
"Mr. and Mrs. Dives?" He grinned and shrugged. "To avoid any confusion." I snorted. "I'm already confused."
Blake took the book back and gestured to the rack of keys.
"There are currently very few guests on the island, so you have your choice of rooms."
David leaned on the desk and pointed at a pink key among the dingy grey ones.
"We'll take that one."
Blake chuckled, but handed the key to David.
"A good choice."
I glanced between the men and the key.
"What's that key go to?"
David winked at me.
"You'll see."
5. I saw, and what was seen couldn't be unseen. I reluctantly followed David up the stairs to the second floor. The stairs continued, but we got off on the landing.
The hallway ran to our left and right, and disappeared around the corners at either end of the castle.
The outer wall held the doors, while the inner wall was covered with arched windows that offered a view of a large inner courtyard. The courtyard was covered in ancient oak trees, curved flower beds, and winding stone paths. I walked up to one of the arched glass windows and peered out.
"So does the courtyard change if I want to steal a plant?"
David moved to stand beside me and smiled.
"I've heard rumors that it changes into a graveyard, but I've never actually seen it."
I wrapped my arms around myself and shuddered.
"Comforting."
He set a hand on my shoulder and nodded to our right.
"Come on.
Our room's this way." David led me down the right-hand hallway and around the corner. More doors lay on our right. One of them, a doorway at the far corner, was pink. We stopped in front of that entrance. David unlocked the door and swung it open. What he revealed was terrifying to behold.
The suite was decked out in a palette of white and a soft pink.
The pinkish-white floor marble tiles, the white walls, the rose-colored cupboards in the small kitchen. Even the feet of the two chairs around the small dining area table were pink. The two pink doors at the back and left-hand side of the suite were open, and led into a bathroom and a bedroom. 4 of the tall, narrow windows looked out on the sharp hillside behind the structure, and the crashing waters of the bay beyond land.
I clapped my hand over my mouth to stifle the scream.
David swept past me, turned to face me, and opened his arms.
"Welcome to the honeymoon suite." I dropped my hand and glared at him. "No." He chuckled but dropped his arms. "Come on, it's not that." "No."
I spun on my heels, but he caught my hand and dragged me deeper into the pinkish abyss, more specifically the bedroom. David shut the door behind us and gestured to the pink monstrosity that was a bed.
"What do you think of the bed?" he asked me. I swept my eyes over the hideous covers and shuddered. "I think I need a flamethrower."
He slipped behind me and wrapped his arms around my upper body. His soft words blew against the sensitive flesh of my neck.
"Maybe you could wait until we're done using it."
I broke from his grasp and spun around to face him.
"Are you nuts?"
We came here to find out who tried to curse you.
That means we could be in mortal danger.
He walked up to me and tilted his head to one side. The look was sensually adorable.
We could, but you forget that I'm here.
My face fell.
Why does that not? He leaned down and captured my lips in a deep, passionate kiss.
My body erupted with a lustful heat that pooled between my legs.
His hands settled on my hips.
Mine wound around his neck. When he pulled back, we both panted for breath. My cheeks were warm and his were flushed. His eyes held a tinge of yellow in their depths that excited me.
More than beautiful, he whispered.
We kissed again.
It was a long, passionate kiss.
His arms looped around my waist and he pressed me close against his body. I felt the bulge of his need in his pants.
The heat inside me caught fire.
His hands roamed over my body. I groaned into our kiss. He pulled away and swept me into his arms. He carried me into my bedroom and set me on the bed. I lay atop the sheets panting. My chest heaved. My body ached with need. His heated eyes swept over me. I felt naked beneath his scrutiny, and I liked it. I pulled my shirt off and tossed it to the side.
The top of my breasts were bared to him, and his eyes widened.
He settled beside me and pressed me to the bed. One of his hands cupped my breast and massaged the sensitive mound of flesh.
I moaned and squirmed.
A crooked grin slipped onto his lips. He unclasped my bra and my breasts were freed from their prison. He leaned down and enclosed my bud in his hot, wet mouth. My eyes widened and I gasped. He suckled me as his hand slid down my side. His fingers danced across my skin until he reached my pants. He deftly unbuttoned my pants and slid them over my hips. I kicked them off and left myself with only my underwear. He raised himself on his hands and studied my naked body.
I squirmed beneath his hungry gaze.
The ache between my legs begged for his touch. He pulled off his shirt and pressed his bare chest against my breasts. We embraced each other in a passionate kiss as his hand delved between my legs. His fingers brushed my quivering womanhood. A tingle of pleasure ran up my body.
I grasped his upper arms and shuddered. It felt so good to be in his grasp, to have a man who lusted for me as I lusted for him.
I wanted to be possessed by a creature as strong as him. A soft, deep groan escaped my lips as the tips of my breasts against his hard chest. My body was alive with the need he stirred inside me. I craved his touch, his lips, him. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me towards him. His warm, muscular body fit perfectly against mine. He slung a leg over both of mine and pressed himself against my hip. A low rumble emanated from his throat. His hand hooked my underwear and slipped the flimsy cloth over my hips.
I squirmed out of them.
The bra soon followed, and I lay naked beneath him. His hot, wet lips left a trail of kisses down my neck. He shed his pants and briefs until he was naked atop me. His long, stiff member rubbed against the quivering flesh of my thighs. I shuddered and bit my lower lip.
He was so huge.
My walls wetted at the opportunity to feel him inside me, thrusting into me, taking me.
Mine, he murmured.
Only mine. My breath quickened. I squirmed beneath him. My body demanded satisfaction. I needed to ease the burning need inside of me. He positioned himself between my legs and sank himself deep inside my wet folds.
I grasped his arms and moaned.
Every inch of him stroked my quivering nerves and sent delicious chills over my body.
Oh God, I moaned.
He grunted and thrust deeper into me. I gasped and clutched onto him. Our dance was slow, achingly slow. Every thrust was a teasing touch of heaven. Each push of him inside me stimulated my lustful appetite, but it didn't satiate me. I wrapped my legs around him. He pressed deeper into me. A deep guttural groan escaped his lips. His thrusts quickened.
Our sweat-soaked bodies slid against each other in perfect harmony.
The room filled with the sounds of our sweet lovemaking. My moans mixed with his grunts. Every thrust brought me closer to fulfillment, to being his in the fullest sense.
I strained to reach that beautiful finish, and to take him with me.
The agonizing pleasure became unbearable.
Our friction drove me to the brink of madness.
When I spoke, my voice was hoarse.
Please. Oh God, please faster, I begged. He slowed his speed. I cried out in frustration and fear.
He raised himself onto his arms and grinned down at me. The yellow in his eyes swallowed his dark brown. A sly feral grin graced his lips.
You are mine and I will not be commanded by you, he growled. I tried to stifle the whimper in my throat but failed.
His grin widened.
He started his thrusts but they were slow.
Spasms of pleasure teased my body.
I arched my pert swollen breasts as a sacrifice to him.
He pressed me against the bed with his body. His thrusts quickened.
I clutched onto him and gasped for breath.
I could feel his stubbornness fade under his carnal need.
Our bodies strained against one another.
Every moment, every thrust was agonizingly wonderful. My body twitched and squirmed. Any moment now.
I was so achingly close.
Soon I would be his, and I relished the thought of belonging to this dominant male.
Tell me how much you like it, he growled. So much, I whispered. I stroked his hair and nibbled on his ear.
My body was filled with him.
I needed only him. Oh God, so much. Scream it to me, he demanded.
I leaned my head back and looked into his bright eyes.
The heat inside them nearly took me. Oh God, please don't stop.
I need more.
I need you.
A grin slid onto his lips.
He thrust faster and deeper into me. Louder, he insisted.
The deliciously erotic incentive heightened my pleasure beyond what I'd ever experienced. My orgasm came swift and powerful.
I was swallowed by blissful pleasure. I threw back my head and yelled my glee to the world. Yes. Oh God, yes. I screamed. He wildly thrust into me.
My body twitched and trembled.
Yours.
Oh God, yours. He leaned back his head and let loose a long, victorious howl. David toppled onto the bed close beside me and took me in his arms. He pulled one of the hideous pink covers over our naked, cooling bodies, and I cuddled against his warm chest.
I guess this bed's not bad, I murmured. He chuckled. Wait until you see the jacuzzi tub.
My eyes fell on the pink sheet over my shoulders and I shuddered.
I think I can wait.
6. The day was still young, so we cleaned up and dressed. A knock on the door reminded us there were others on the island. I leaned against the arm of a cushioned white couch with pink pillows as David answered the door. Blake stood in the hallway, and behind him was Famil with our luggage. Blake smiled and bowed his head.
I trust you've had enough time to get settled.
David returned the bow with one of his own.
Quite. And I'm guessing this is the time to see the spooky stuff.
Blake nodded.
Yes, though I must warn you not to touch anything. The dungeons are not a place to take lightly. I arched an eyebrow. Dungeons?
Blake looked past David at me.
Yes.
This structure was originally a prison for criminals, petty and violent. Those who misbehaved or were too insane to manage were banished to the dungeons to live out their sentences. A crooked grin slid onto his lips.
That is, those who managed to live out their sentences.
David clapped his hands together.
Well, with that cheery bit of information, let's go see who tried to curse me.
We stepped out into the hall, and Famil slipped past us into our suite. His cloudy eyes didn't look once at me. Blake guided us down the hall while I sidled up to David and lowered my voice to a whisper.
What's with that Famil guy?
Blake turned his head enough so we could see one eye.
I have very good hearing for my age, Miss Combes.
As for your question, Famil has never been much for conversation, even when he was living. I raised an eyebrow.
So he's undead. Our host smiled. Yes, but not in the way I am. He's a zombie. I froze and blinked at him.
The men continued a few paces before they stopped.
Seriously? I asked him.
Blake faced us and nodded.
Quite serious.
He was a very loyal servant of mine in life, and when an assassin took his life, I had him resurrected so he could continue to serve me.
I cringed. Isn't that a kind of punishment?
Blake smiled and shook his head. Contrary to what modern movies and books report, the existence of a zombie is not completely without life. They have improved strength and speed and are able to eat and drink, though they don't need the sustenance any more than I.
And have the eyes and complexion of a fish with the personality of a rock, I quipped. He shrugged. There are drawbacks, of course, but an argument like this is fruitless.
Come along.
He turned his back on us and strode down the hall.
We followed, albeit I was reluctant as I glared at Blake's back. David's eyes flickered down to me, and there was a teasing smile at the corners of his lips.
You're really trying to make yourself an open blood bank. I turned my glare on him. I don't like zombie movies, and I don't like zombies. You're in a different world, and there are different rules here, he reminded me.
A sly smile slipped onto my face.
Then maybe it's time a few rules were broken.
David clasped my hand and chuckled.
I thought there was a reason you would make a suitable mate.
Other than your frisky nature, that is. We moved down the stairs and went into the hallway beside the steps. The dozen doors on the right hand were much like those upstairs, but closer together.
On the left was a side hallway that led into the employees-only section of the castle.
The end of the wide hallway stopped at a pair of French doors that led out onto a small lawn. To the left of the doors and set 3 feet into the wall was a small landing that was stopped by a thick door, with a small barred window in the upper center. A large lock shut what lay behind the door from prying eyes. Blake stopped us at the thick door and opened the lock with a key with a head shaped like a skull. The rust and brittleness of the key informed us of its great age.
The previous owners were kind enough to pass me the key to this very unique basement, Blake commented as he swung open the door.
The entrance swung inward and revealed a narrow, winding stone staircase. The stairs spiraled around a thick column of stone that sank deep into the earth. The walls were a mix of placed stone and those hewn from the earth where they were found. We were hit with a blast of damp air that made me cringe. Even David wrinkled his nose and his eyes flickered to Blake.
You really need to air out your basement.
Blake pocketed his key and smiled.
That would be quite difficult, considering there are no windows down there.
David squeezed my hand and glanced down at me.
And that's why you're staying close.
Blake chuckled and turned away from us towards the stairs.
That and for other reasons.
Blake guided us into the depths of the island. Lit torches every 20 feet offered some flickering light, but did little to vanquish the darkness that lay in the walls where the corners of the stones met. Water slid down the walls and created utopias for mold and moss. We traveled straight down some 50 feet before we reached the bottom.
A hallway ran in 3 directions, left, right, and straight ahead of us.
More torches revealed cell doors in the walls to our immediate left and right, and in front of us on either side. Blake paused and half turned to us. The flickering light aged his serious features.
I feel I must remind you to keep to the center of the hallway. Otherwise, I can't account for the consequences.
We nodded. The dank, quiet place demanded as much silence as possible. Blake led us down the hallway straight ahead of us. I stepped to one side and peeked through the barred doors.
The torchlight didn't penetrate more than a foot into those small, damp confines.
Each shadowed cell held a stone bench carved from the wall and nothing more. David tugged on my hand, and I looked over my shoulder at him.
Not too close, he warned me. Then he tugged again.
Harder this time, and on the wrong hand. I whipped my head around and saw what held my right hand. It was a faint grey fog, with the barely discernible outline of a woman in a tattered dress. The figure leaned against the cell bars and had its arms stretched out to trap mine. The apparition's eyes glowed a malevolent red, and she gave another tug that pulled me closer to her cell. I did the only reasonable thing I could think of. I screamed. Nice, long, loud and clear. My high-pitched note of terror startled the creature.
It slipped back into the darkness and disappeared beneath the stone bench.
David pulled me against his chest, and I gladly clutched onto him with shaking hands. Blake hurried over to us, having continued the journey a few steps without us. His eyes fell on me, and he pursed his lips.
You stepped too close to a cell. It was a statement, not a question.
I swallowed my diminishing fear, and turned to look into the cell. My voice was hoarse but steady.
What was it?
Blake followed my gaze and pursed his lips.
A soul of one of the many unfortunate people who died here.
They are trapped to this place by their final strong emotions.
Even women? I asked him. He turned to me and a sly smile slipped onto his lips. Women commit crimes as well as men, but come.
Madam Bentley waits for us. We continued on, and I stayed close to David. 7. Blake led us to the end of the hallway. Another thick door but without a window stood in the rear wall. The door was opened a crack, and I heard the sounds of soft chanting. Blake pushed open the door and stepped inside. We followed, and I saw the room was hewn from the natural stone of the island. The shape of the space was circular, and a dome-shaped ceiling rose above us. The smooth stone floor was carved into four-cornered blocks that had a wide end away from the center, and a smaller end closer to the center. The most startling part of the room, however, was the countless words scrolled on the walls. They were written in various hands, by every variety of ink. It was a rainbow of language, and most of them I didn't understand. Some appeared to be Latin, others Arabic, and there was definitely some German written in a strong black ink. An old woman with shut eyes sat in the middle of the room on a plush silk pillow. In front of her was a small black cauldron, and on either side of the clawed footpot were bottles of various colors. The woman appeared to be just shy of Methuselah's age, with her thin strands of white hair, and so many wrinkles she would make a basset hound jealous. She was short, barely 5 foot, and her gnarled hands with long sharp fingernails sat in her lap. Her attire was a simple black dress, and beside her was a small round felt hat only slightly taller than a beret. Blake shut the door behind us and walked over to her. The old woman didn't open her eyes as he knelt by her side.
He cupped a hand over his mouth. Madam Bentley.
The old woman's eyes flew open and she started back.
Her head whipped from side to side. What?
Where?
What's wanted? Did you finish your casting?
Blake asked her. She noticed him and scowled.
Of course I've finished it. What do you think I am? She snapped. Science has yet to explain, David quipped.
Madam Bentley's gaze fell on David and her eyes narrowed.
So you've come. He smiled and shrugged. It's hard to say no to a personal invitation from Blake. Her frown deepened. That's Lord Basilius to you. Her eyes flickered to Blake. I told you he wasn't needed.
I could just as well have made a wooden doll with his personality, and thrown that to the curse. David grinned.
I don't think you would have done justice to my likeness, Madam Bentley. She sneered at him and her eyes fell on me. I would have done better than you've done with it.
Blake stepped between the two adversaries and frowned. You both have received your insults, now manage yourselves so we can find out to what end this spell was cast. Madam Bentley glanced at her patron and thrust a thumb at David.
I have it all prepared.
He need only touch the curse to activate it. David swept his arm over the room.
Lead me to it, and I shall touch it.
I raised an eyebrow.
Touch it.
He looked to me and jerked his head towards the walls.
Every single one of those little love notes is a curse on someone. That's why they call this place the Cursed Chamber. It's Cursed Chamber, you idiot, Madam Bentley growled. I grabbed his arm and gave a tug.
He glanced at me with that devilish smile of his.
You rang.
I nodded at the walls.
What if this is a death curse?
Wouldn't activating it kill you? Madam Bentley turned her nose up at me and frowned.
I've softened the curse, so the worst effects will be a minor cramp.
David moved to face me and clasped our hands together. He jerked his head towards the witch.
You heard the old crone. This won't hurt me much.
Madam Bentley's face took on an unhealthy shade of red. She balled her hands into fists and her shoulders shook.
See, crone.
You dare.
Enough, Blake interceded.
He glanced from David to the madam. Begin your tasks. Madam Bentley's darkened expression didn't disappear before she turned away to face the wall. David followed her, and together they went to the rear left of the conical chamber. A fresh coat of red words had been applied to the wall some 4 feet above the floor. Bentley grabbed David's hands and pressed the palms against the words. A bright red light burst from the red letters and shone off the smooth walls. Blake and I turned our faces away and shielded our eyes with our arms. The brilliance lasted for only a few moments, and then I heard a distinct voice.
What the fuck?
I whipped my head back. Bentley and David were broken apart. The witch studied the red words which glowed softly. Beside her and a few feet away stood David. He was doubled over, and one of his arms was wrapped around his stomach. His other palm was pressed against the wall. David lifted his head and glared at the witch. His voice was tense and hoarse.
That's more than a little cramp.
I rushed to his side and grasped his arms.
He turned to me and smiled. Sweat trickled down his temples. Hey.
I looked him over, but couldn't see any obvious signs of a death curse infection.
Where does it hurt?
He winced and hung his head.
Let's just say this. I think I know how you girls feel every month.
Blake strode over to us and stood close beside Bentley. His eyes settled on the old witch.
Well. She squinted and pursed her lips. It was definitely a death curse. No kidding, David retorted.
Her narrowed eyes flickered to him.
Quit your whining.
If the curse had worked as intended, you would have already died a very painful death. David winced.
Are you sure it just isn't taking longer than usual?
Blake stepped in their line of sight and glanced at Bentley.
Do you know who cast the curse and how to break it?
Bentley closed her eyes and shook her head.
No, but I do know this.
After the alarms were set off by the curse activation, the novice who wrote this wouldn't have had time to escape the castle. They wouldn't have had the skill to levitate a pen to write the curse from afar.
I blinked at her. Curse activation.
Blake half turned to me and nodded.
Yes.
The danger of this room necessitates an alarm system that activates when a new curse is created in this room. Madam Bentley stood straight and puffed out her chest.
It's a system of my own design. Which explains how it didn't help this time, David quipped. She shrank and scowled at him. You ungrateful wretch. I should relinquish the curse and let you. That's enough, Blake interrupted. We have more pressing business than your personal squabbles.
Bentley closed her eyes and bowed her head.
Yes, Lord Basilius.
David took a deep breath, and his eyes flickered to Blake.
Could the person who let them in have also hidden them?
Blake nodded.
It's the only way.
A malevolent person would not have been able to hide in any of the rooms without another opening the door for them. Also, we found the boat that took them to the island, and no other boat but my own has left, so they couldn't have snuck away. David straightened and grimaced.
So now it's a matter of playing hide and seek. I tightened my grip on his upper arms and turned him towards the door. You're seeking no one.
The only place you're going is to bed. I marched him towards the door, but he dug his heels into the floor and stopped us.
As much as I enjoy going to bed now, that won't quite work. I glared at him. Why not? He's right, Blake spoke up. Until the curse is lifted, he will feel the effects.
David glanced over his shoulder and grinned at me.
I'd really like to get off my period as soon as possible.
I rolled my eyes and let go of him.
Fine, but don't blame me if you need to use the restroom every 10 seconds. He chuckled. I'll be sure not to complain. That would be a first.
Bentley grumbled. Blake glanced at her and nodded at the writing on the wall.
You will remain here and study the curse.
We will try to find the caster.
She bowed her head. As you wish, my lord. He turned to us and gestured to the door. If you would.
I pushed David towards the entrance.
Gladly.
8. We traversed the haunted hallways and arrived at the top of the spiraling stone staircase a few minutes later. Blake shut and locked the door behind us. David leaned his shoulder against the clean walls of the ground floor and took a deep breath.
I think that old hag weakened the curse just enough so it wouldn't quite kill me.
Blake set his hand on David's shoulder and smiled.
You have given her a great many reasons to dislike you. But to curse me with this is low, David argued.
Blake patted his shoulder and strode past us.
It will give you incentive to find the person who cursed you.
David frowned.
And you're going to do what?
Blake paused and glanced over his shoulder at us.
I will try to determine who among my staff allowed such a person on my island. If you will excuse me. He bowed his head and left us.
David grimaced and shook his head.
Just like that guy to leave us hanging.
I grasped his shoulders and caught his eyes.
You sure you're going to be all right?
He pushed off the wall and nodded.
Yeah, but let's hurry.
I glanced down the hall at the dozen doors to our left and the hallway on our right.
I hate to disappoint you, but this could take a while. He chuckled and tapped the side of his nose. Not with this sniffer. I arched an eyebrow. You're going to sniff him out? Or her? And yes, he confirmed. That's probably one of the reasons Blake brought me here.
That and to watch me suffer from menstrual cramps.
He knew you'd follow the smell of the caster.
I guessed. David nodded.
Yep. Now that I know the scent of the cursed chamber. Cursed chamber, I corrected him.
He leaned down and pecked a small kiss on my forehead. His eyes twinkled with mischief.
What would I do without you, my own personal Bentley?
I grinned.
Probably mispronounce every room's name. He straightened and shrugged. Possibly.
Anyway, let's get this sniffing party started before I start bleeding. He lifted his nose to the air and smiled.
And it seems I have my first trail.
Come on. I followed him down the hall, and we turned right into the employees-only area. White doors led into rooms with nameplates on the top front with words like closet, changing room and skin stretching room. I shuddered and glanced to David.
So, why doesn't an ancient vampire with a witch and zombie on his payroll have a werewolf? He's not fond of the scent of wet fur, David told me.
We reached the end of the hall. The way opened into a large kitchen with fresh steel counters and cupboards. Large long islands broke the room into separate spaces, and pots and pans hung from the ceiling and obscured a clear view of the whole area. A middle-aged man my height with a tall white hat and apron stood over a cutting board. His dark face was brutish, and curly black hair poked out from beneath his hat. In one hand was a large cleaver, and in the other was a defenseless carrot. In a split second, the carrot was chopped into small bits and brushed aside for the next victim from a pile of vegetables beside the board. David skirted around the islands and walked over to the man.
I held back. The knife was long enough to heed caution. Good afternoon, David greeted the man. The chef whipped his head up but didn't stop his chopping.
He curled his lips into a sneer.
What are you two doing back here? No guests allowed in the kitchen.
My eyes widened and I pointed at the board.
Your finger.
His lack of attention meant the knife cut clean through one digit.
There wasn't any blood, but there was definitely a severed finger. He lifted his hand and growled. Now look what you made me do.
The man grabbed his detached joint and screwed it back on.
He flexed his hand and grinned. There it is.
Good as new. My eyes bulged out of my head. I whipped my head to David and pointed at the man.
How?
What?
Huh. He's a ghoul, he explained. The chef glared at us and wagged his knife in our direction. You're just lucky I didn't have to grow it back. With a trick like that, you must be popular at cannibal parties, David quipped.
The ghoul pointed his knife at a pair of double swinging doors.
Get out.
David held up his hands.
No need for that.
We're here with permission from Blake.
The chef raised an eyebrow. Lord Basilius. What's he complaining about now? Too much garlic in his spaghetti.
David shook his head.
No, he was curious if you saw anyone come in here yesterday who shouldn't have been.
The man scratched his chin with the point of his knife.
You know, there was the bellhop in here during lunch. I remember, because I had to yell at him to get out of my way. He seemed awful nervous about something.
David smiled and bowed his head.
Thanks for the info. It was a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Al.
David shook the ghoul's non-knife hand.
Thanks, Al. Be seeing you.
David led me out of the kitchen through the double doors. We came out in the dining room that lay in the left wing of the castle. A long oak table with thick legs and clawed feet graced the center, and around the table stood 24 high-backed ornate chairs.
The chair closest to the kitchen was the tallest.
David didn't stop to sniff, but strode forward down the long dining hall.
I hurried after him. You think we've got our man? I asked him. He grinned. We can't be sure until we have a little talk with Mr. Hop.
We came out on the entrance hall. The zombie man stood behind the front desk, but his pale companion was nowhere to be seen.
Looks like the guy knows we're playing hide and seek with him, I quipped.
David lifted his nose and frowned.
It seems we're not the only ones playing.
He strode across the hall to the large sitting room.
I heard the faint sound of voices before we entered the space.
The long sitting room contained the living room furniture and a pair of pool tables at the back. The dark paneled walls flanked a large stone fireplace centered in the wall opposite the entrance. Tall, wide-paned windows looked out on the yard and the open waters of the bay, but they were covered by thick curtains that let no light nor view into the room. A pair of shadowed figures stood on the side of the hearth farthest from us. One of them had their back to us, and the other was the pale bellhop for whom we searched. The bellhop's face was especially pallid in the dim light. He looked past his companion at us, and his eyes widened. His companion half turned around, and revealed himself to be Blake. Blake frowned at us.
What are you doing here?
David smiled and strode over to them.
You didn't think my nose could find the culprit as fast as you could, did you?
Blake arched an eyebrow.
That's a high accusation. Have you any proof?
David stalked around him and slid up to stand beside the pale young man. His eyes flickered from the bellhop to Blake, and a sly smile slipped onto his lips.
You two look alike. You don't happen to be related, do you?
Blake narrowed his eyes.
I don't think this is any of your concern.
David laughed and finished it with a wince.
I think I've got a horse in this race, considering it's my neck on the line.
You vampires can understand necks and lines, can't you? Blake pointed at the arched entrance.
That's enough.
I demand you leave. I will have my boat return you to the mainland. David shrugged and walked past Blake. He looped his arm through mine and guided me towards the doorway.
All right, but don't think we'll keep quiet about this family affair on your account.
Blake's eyes widened and he spun around.
Wait.
David stopped and turned us to face the pair of vampires.
Now will you talk?
Blake pursed his lips but nodded.
Very well, but your tenacious sniffing hardly gave me time to inquire from my nephew exactly how he may have been involved. I arched an eyebrow. How do you know it was your nephew who let the person in?
Blake half turned to the pale young man and his expression darkened. Basil Charlotte is the youngest of my staff by several decades of employment, and thus the most likely to have been tricked by someone into allowing them access to the curse chamber. The pale young man hung his head.
I didn't know that's what she wanted to do down there. She just said she wanted to take a look.
David raised an eyebrow.
Who wanted to take a look?
Basil shrugged without lifting his head.
A girl I met in the city on one of my nights off. She said she heard about the place and wanted to take a look. Where are you hiding her?
Blake questioned him. Basil nodded at the wall to his right.
In my room. I tried hiding her in the kitchen, but the place was so busy yesterday that I nearly got ran over by the chef. Lead us to her, Blake commanded his nephew.
The nephew lifted his head and opened his mouth, but paused. A strange white film slipped over his eyes, covering them with a vacant look, akin to college students listening to a lecture. Basil snapped his mouth shut and lifted his hand.
He waved to us. And then he vanished.
9.
Damn it.
Blake cursed before he too disappeared in the blink of an eye. All I felt was a wind pass me by and move in the direction of the entrance. David grasped my shoulders and stared into my eyes.
Stay. He turned away from me, but I grabbed his arm and glared at him. I don't know what's going on, but he shook his head. No time to explain. The hunt's on. Then at least let me give you this.
I grabbed the collar of his shirt and pulled him down to capture his lips in a passionate kiss. I released him and he staggered back. His wide eyes blinked at me.
I folded my arms across my chest and grinned. Not bad, eh?
He looked down at himself and touched his stomach.
It's gone. It was my turn to blink at him. What's gone? The pain.
A smile slid onto his lips. He leapt at me, grabbed me around the waist and spun me in a circle.
You've lifted the curse. I clutched onto his arms as he kept me suspended in the air. If that's true, then I want something in return. He nodded. Anything. Put me down. Oh.
Right. David set me down and pecked a light, teasing kiss on my lips. He pulled away and saluted me.
Be seeing you.
Then he too flew from the room at a speed I couldn't match. He glared at the spot where he just stood.
Damn werewolves and the damn speed. But our speed is one of our finest qualities, a voice spoke up. I spun around to face the hearth.
A woman 5 years my senior stood on the far side. She was about my height, with a slim, lithe figure. Her long raven black hair trailed down her back like the mane of a wild stallion, and she had matching dark eyes. Her complexion was dark-skinned, as though she spent a lot of time in the sun. The woman wore a tight-fitting red silk dress and flat-bottom red shoes. One of her hands rested on the mantel, and she studied my face.
I stepped back. I hadn't heard her come in, and her words were more than an indication of her paranormalness. Are you a guest?
She dropped her hand and her sly smile widened.
Not quite, though I have been staying here for the last day.
My pulse quickened.
I made to take another step back, but I blinked.
The woman vanished. I stiffened when I felt breath on the back of my neck.
You're scared of me, she whispered. She stood behind me. Her hands ghosted over my arms. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Anybody would be terrified of your breath. Her hands paused in their phantom perusal.
Her words carried on a more strained tone.
You're as sharp-tongued and witless as your mate. I frowned. You know David. She laughed.
2 of her fingers danced across my right shoulder blade.
I more than just know him.
You could say we're connected by a special bond. Like yours, but a little more, well, lunar.
I spun around and faced her. She folded her arms and smiled at me. Is something the matter? You look like you've seen a ghost.
My eyebrows crashed down and I narrowed my eyes.
You're that gypsy girl, aren't you? The one who changed him.
Her lips curled up in a sneer.
I'm no girl, but yes, I was the one who gave him the gift. I snorted. Yeah, a gift with strings attached.
She shrugged and walked towards me. I backed up until my spine jabbed into the mantel.
Nothing in life is free, girl. It took quite a bit of time and expense to get this far in our plans. I won't have you interfering again. I slid down the mantel. You're talking about the curse.
She rolled her eyes.
Isn't it obvious?
And your little kiss for your prince has ruined everything. Now I'll have to try the spell again, but this time you won't be here to stop me. She raised one hand. My eyes widened as the fingers lengthened and the nails sharpened into long claws. She drew back her hand and lunged at me. I ducked and rolled to one side.
Her claws cut into my sleeve and drew blood.
I crashed into a small table that divided the sitting area from the pool tables. A vase and bowl crashed to the ground around me, and the table toppled over.
I flipped over onto my rear and froze.
The gypsy woman knelt in front of me.
Her clawed fingers were inches from my nose.
A terrible grin slipped onto her cruel lips.
Pray to your God, human.
I inched my legs against me and smiled.
God, give me good aim. I fell back and kicked up my feet.
My soles connected with her gut, and she was shoved backwards off her unstable perch. I grabbed a large piece of shattered glass from the vase and clutched it like a dagger.
The woman sat up and glared at me. You bitch, she snarled. I snorted. Takes one to know one.
A terrible roar interrupted our witty repertoire. We whipped our heads to the doorway. David stood under the arch. He was partially transformed but all mad. His yellow, narrowed eyes were glued to the woman.
She stood and smirked. Well, what a surprise.
His lips curled back in a snarl.
Get away from her, he ordered the woman.
She held up her hands and stepped close to one of the curtained windows.
You win, but I won't go quietly. She spun around and threw herself at the curtain.
The woman disappeared into the thick fabric, which crashed into the window.
Glass flew everywhere, and I heard the curtain tear.
Then there came a deafening scream that echoed as though the sound started close and drifted down. David rushed up to me and knelt by my side.
Are you okay? I smiled up at him and nodded. Yeah, but I never thought I'd be glad to see your furry face. Just part of being your mate.
His eyes fell on my wounded arm. He grasped my arm and studied the marks.
These aren't deep.
I rolled my eyes and pulled my arm from his hands.
Thanks, that makes me feel a lot better.
He grinned and offered me his hand.
I might have something to soothe your ache.
I shrugged and he helped me to my feet. I opened my mouth, but was interrupted by an echoing growl. The noise came from beyond the window. I glanced in that direction and raised an eyebrow.
Is she okay?
David chuckled as he reverted back to human and offered me his arm.
Let's go see.
I accepted the offer, and together we strode over to the curtain. David pulled aside the torn fabric, and we glanced out the large jagged remains of the window. The beautiful view of the bay remained, but the green grass was gone. A 50-foot deep by 50-foot wide dirt hole sat in place of the foliage. The sides were straight and the dirt was packed hard. I leaned over the sill and stared down into the chasm. A small dot stood at the bottom of the deep hole. The woman was transformed into her werewolf self. The claw marks on the walls showed her fruitless efforts to escape.
Get me out of here, she demanded.
David smiled and shook his head.
I'd rather not.
You're so fond of my life that you want to take it for yourself.
We'll just let you stay in there until you're a little older.
Say 50.
You monster, she growled. He scoffed. Coming from a mercenary, that's a compliment.
I looked to David and pointed at the hole.
Where did that come from? He chuckled.
Blake always warns his guests that any door inside the castle opened with bad intent is a trap, but he likes to keep it a secret that an exterior door or window opened with bad intent is subject to the same laws. I raised an eyebrow.
So when she jumped through the window, the ground opened up and swallowed her, he finished. I snorted and glanced back at the hole. Not a bad werewolf trap. Speaking of paranormal creatures, David commented as he half-turned.
I followed his gaze to the sitting room entrance. Blake strode in with the collar of his nephew in one hand, and a frown on his lips. Basil hung his head, and the rest of his unconscious body was limp. Famil, the front desk zombie, and Al followed close behind.
Did you catch her?
Blake asked us. David jerked his head towards the window.
No, but you did.
Blake tossed his nephew to the two zombies and joined us at the windowsill. He leaned over and smiled.
I see. This is the woman with whom my nephew was so enamored.
David nodded.
Yes, and she's also the one who cursed me.
Blake whipped his head to David and arched an eyebrow.
I see. That would explain the grudge she bears against you.
David's eyes fell on me.
But not the grudge she bears you. Why was she wanting to hurt you? I shrugged. I think she thought I broke the curse, and before she went for a rematch, she decided to get me out of the way.
Madam Bentley shuffled into the room. Her small eyes swept over our party.
What's going on here?
Who set off a trap? Blake turned to her.
Is the curse over Mr. Dives still active?
She pursed her lips and shook her head.
No. I was coming up here to find out why when the alarm sounded.
I raised an eyebrow.
I didn't hear anything. It's only meant to be heard by Famil, Madam Bentley and myself, Blake explained.
Bentley's narrowed eyes studied David with a mix of disgust and interest.
But what happened to the curse?
Who lifted it? David smiled and nodded at me.
Miss Combes did.
Bentley settled her eyes on me and raised an eyebrow.
Her?
I sensed no abilities inside her.
How did she do it? With a kiss, David explained.
Bentley's eyes widened.
A kiss? Of course.
A curse created by hate is destroyed by its opposite. David leaned out the windowsill and glanced down at the werewolf woman.
The woman snarled at him. And she certainly does hate me.
Blake frowned. Did she know magic when you knew her before? David straightened and shook his head.
No, but I didn't try to get to know her better than I already did, and she is a gypsy.
Blake rubbed his chin with his palm.
That is true.
They are known for their cunning ways. His eyes flickered to his unconscious nephew. She was cunning enough to trick my nephew and cast a spell of control on him without his knowing or my detecting it.
When you speak with her, you might want to ask her how she managed to hide her scent from me as well, David suggested.
Blake smiled.
There's no need to wait. We shall speak to her right now.
10. Blake snapped his fingers.
The hole in the ground outside lurched upward.
The woman drew closer to us, and I saw her legs tense for a jump.
I pointed at her. She's going to... She leapt when the hole was 10 feet from becoming even with the ground.
Blake grinned and leapt into the air. He caught her by the throat in mid-leap, and when he landed he had her firmly in his grasp. She grasped his hand and tried to pull loose, but he tightened his grip. She gasped and her eyes bulged out of her head.
Her face took on an unhealthy shade of blue.
Blake looked her in the eyes and frowned.
If you wish to breathe again, then cease your struggling.
The woman stopped, and Blake walked over to us. David and I parted, and the vampire hopped into the room. Famil had fetched a chair, and Blake set her down hard on the cushioned seat. He kept his hand on her shoulder to trap her in the chair.
She glared up at him. I won't talk, she warned him.
Blake smiled.
That would be a pit, why, for I have a great many questions.
First, what is your name?
She pressed her lips together.
Blake tightened his grip on her shoulder and she winced. My grip is quite strong, and I have no fear in testing my strength on you, he warned her.
Fuck off, she growled.
Blake slipped in front of her. He grasped her chin between his fingers and forced her to stare into his eyes. I noticed the red in his eyes grew brighter while her eyes grew wider. He released her chin and stepped back.
"What is your name?" he repeated.
She continued to stare at his face when she spoke, and her voice was devoid of emotion.
"My name is Asina."
Blake nodded at David.
"Why did you attempt to kill him?" "Because I wished to."
Blake frowned at the woman.
"But why did you make an attempt on his life?" "To kill him." David smiled. "You seem to be getting a lot of honest and empty answers, Blake."
Blake's frown deepened.
"Through whom did you learn magic?" "Through one who knows magic." "What is the name of the one who knows magic?"
"Teacher." David coughed into his hand.
"While this is all very fascinating, I think we'll leave you to question her."
Blake stepped back and studied his mesmerized prisoner.
She must have expected for such an interrogation, and prepared her mind for the most obvious questions. "Which means this might take a while, but if you find anything else, feel free to tell us," David requested.
Blake didn't look at David when he nodded.
"I'll report to you all that concerns you."
David smiled.
"Fair enough."
He glanced down at me and offered me his arm.
"Shall we try to enjoy the rest of the day?"
I took his arm and ruefully smiled.
"I'd rather sleep the rest of it away."
He grinned, and a familiar twinkle slipped into his eyes.
"I might have other plans for a bed. I have other rooms that you might discuss such matters in, and I would appreciate if you would do so in them," Blake spoke up.
David's eyes flickered from Blake to me.
"You heard our host. Let us to our room."
We left the party and reached our room. For once I was glad to enter the pink monstrosity. David tossed the sweet keys onto the pink couch, and plopped himself onto another cushion.
He smiled up at me. "Quite a day, eh?" I sat on the arm of the couch close beside him, and raised an eyebrow. "Is this how you spend all your weekends?" He shrugged. "Only the quiet ones, but it can get pretty exciting." I snorted. "That's putting it mildly."
Am I going to have to worry about any other ex-girlfriends trying to kill me, or is this one extra special?
"Extra special with a dash of jealousy," he replied. He stared ahead of him and pursed his lips. "Though she's not the one I'm worried about." I frowned.
A werewolf woman who changes you, and then tries to kill you with a curse isn't what you're worried about.
He shook his head. "No. I'm more worried about who put her up to this." I arched an eyebrow. "I don't follow."
He leaned back and sighed. Asina doesn't do anything without the bidding of her father. Especially when it involves a mission as fraught with danger as sneaking into the castle to cast a death spell on me. I walked over to him and folded my arms over my chest.
"Why didn't you tell Blake about this?"
A sly smile curled his lips. Blake and I have an understanding that we tell each other information on a need-to-know basis, and
"He didn't need to know," I finished.
I rolled my eyes.
"Men."
David leaned forward and wrapped his arms around me. I yelped as he pulled me onto his lap so that my legs straddled him and we faced each other. His devilishly handsome eyes swept over me, as his hands rested on my hips. I inhaled his musky scent and tried not to shudder as a lustful heat spread through me. His voice was low and husky.
"And speaking of my sex, it's been quite a while since I proved to you how much of a man I can be. That is, if you're done fearing for my life."
I looped my arms around his neck and leaned my breasts against his hard chest.
"I was kind of hoping we could enjoy the sweet one last time."
The bed isn't so bad when my eyes are closed. He leaned forward and pecked a teasing kiss on my lips.
"I was thinking we could do without the bed this time."
I ground my thighs against his and felt his swollen need.
He shut his eyes and clenched his teeth.
A sly smile slid onto my lips.
"Funny. I was thinking the same thing."
My lover opened his eyes and revealed the golden orbs of his feral self. He captured my lips in a searing kiss that left us both hot and breathless. My body sank into the sensual heat of lust. I craved his touch and lusted for his attentions. Every fiber in me bent to his will as he unbuttoned my jeans and drew off my shirt. His gentle, powerful hands explored my smooth, trembling body as his mouth left a trail of hot kisses down my throat.
Our hips rocked together in a slow, tense rhythm. I leaned my head back and panted.
My body longed for him to take me swiftly and forcefully, to make me his like no other man could do. I grasped his arms and groaned as the lustful beast inside me strained to be released. He stirred within me a hunger that was far from natural, but one that I desired like nothing else.
He tore off his shirt and my bra. Our sweat-soaked, naked upper bodies rubbed against one another, stirring up a terrible fire of desire and pleasure that slipped through us.
His lips enclosed over my pert nubs. I grasped his head and groaned as his warm mouth suckled me. His hands unbuttoned his jeans and positioned me over his strong muscular hips. I gasped as I felt his stiff, trembling manhood brush against the coarse hairs between my legs. He eased himself into me, and my wet, hot walls welcomed him. He pulled his face back and clenched his teeth, but a hiss escaped his lips. I moaned. His hips thrust up hot and deep into me. I grasped his shoulders and shuddered. My body trembled with lust and desire. I pushed my hips against his to heighten these wonderful sensations I so craved. I whimpered, and he grunted. His hands grabbed my hips, and he thrust harder and deeper into me. I gasped and closed my eyes. My body was soaked from our joined hunger. We strained against each other, begging our bodies to find blissful completion. I leaned my head back and reveled in the feel of him as he took me so completely. I was his body and soul. No one else could possess me so completely as he did with his hands, lips, and manhood.
The tension built higher.
I gasped for breath.
The friction became unbearable.
I needed him to make me his, to force me to the heavenly heights of completion.
I wetted my lips and moaned. More.
Oh God, please, faster. Faster. He grunted and penetrated me with a speed I couldn't match. A smooth smile slipped onto my lips as I felt the waves of pleasure roll over me.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Oh God, yes. Take me.
David. David. My chance finished me. My body exploded in a flash of brilliant light and pleasure. I screamed my success and soaked my body in more lust as he continued to thrust hard and fast into me. My body jerked and shuddered even as he came inside of me. I fell against him, and our sweat-soaked bodies panted against one another. David wrapped his arms around me and chuckled.
You bring the animal out of me more than the full moon, he teased.
I snuggled my face into the crook of his neck and closed my eyes.
What can I say? It's just a gift. He petted my hair. I felt myself drifting off to sleep in the safety of his strong arms.
11. My awakening was a furious knock on the front door to our suite.
I creaked open my eyes and saw I lay in the bed.
David jumped from the bed, covered himself in a robe from the closet, and swept out of the room. I wrapped a sheet around me and hurried to the partially open doorway in time to watch David open the front door. Blake stood in the doorway. A deep frown covered his lips.
She's escaped.
David raised an eyebrow.
Athena.
Blake nodded.
Yes.
I wasn't aware she had cast a controlling spell on Al, and he helped her escape from her holding cell in the basement. My eyes widened.
You kept her down there.
Blake looked past David at me.
Yes, but in one of the newer cells that has no haunting. Where did she go?
David asked him. Blake closed his eyes and shook his head.
I don't know.
Al is still missing, and with his assistance she can enter any part of the castle. Footsteps echoed down the hall and Famil appeared by Blake's side. He bowed to the vampire, before he started into some sort of game of charades with his hands. I would have joined in the fun if the situation hadn't been so deadly, and I had been wearing more clothes. Blake watched the zombies pantomime for a moment, before he pursed his lips and nodded.
I see. Return him to the castle.
Famil bowed and hurried off. David raised an eyebrow.
Mind translating that clown show?
Blake's eyes flickered to David.
It seems your old acquaintance has fled the island via one of the emergency boats.
Al was found nearby in a stupor, and I have ordered Famil to return him to the castle. David frowned.
Aren't you going to try to follow her?
Blake shook his head.
No.
The boat has been gone too long, and we're not even sure which direction it headed. There are many beaches along the cliffs, where someone may hide a small craft as what she stole. We would never find her if she chose not to be found. I shoved open the door, and marched over to him in all my sheet-covered rage.
So you're just going to let an attempted murderer go free?
The vampire narrowed his cool eyes at me.
I am not without an alternative.
I will have Madame Bentley cast a spell over the island that will prevent her ever touching the shores.
If she causes you any more problems, it will not be through me. I snorted. That makes me feel. David placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. He smiled at Blake.
Thanks. I doubt you'll get anything out of Al or your nephew, so we'll take our leave of the island as soon as you can get your boat ready. Blake stiffly bowed his head.
As you wish.
He cast one flickering glance at me and strode down the hall. David shut the door.
I shrugged off his hand and glared at him. What was that for? That stupid vampire just let that crazy woman get away. He turned to me with a frown on his lips. That crazy vampire was about to make a withdrawal from your blood bank. I crossed my arms over my chest. It's not him I'm worried about, it's your ex-girlfriend. She's the only one who's actually tried to kill us.
Both of us. He leaned down and pecked a kiss on my lips. A brush of that familiar pleasant haze slipped over me before I shook myself and glared at his smiling face.
He chuckled. I don't think she'll be trying anything for a while. I arched an eyebrow. Why?
He stepped past me towards the bedroom.
It took her father and her this long to try to attack me. I suspect they don't have a plan B for their revenge against me.
I followed after him and leaned against the frame to watch him dress himself.
It was a disappointing sight. Why are they so mad at you? I mean, all you did was not pay them, right? He stooped to pick up a pillow, but paused at my question.
A sigh escaped his lips before he straightened.
That isn't entirely the truth.
My face drooped and I narrowed my eyes at him.
Then what is? He turned to me with a goofy grin. When they told me what they did to me, I kind of scratched up Asina's father. How bad? He was still bedridden when I left them a week later. That sounds like more than a scratching. Well, they weren't sure he was going to be able to walk either.
My eyes widened and I pushed off the door frame.
Okay, that's a little more than a scratching.
He turned away and glanced down at the pillow in his hands. His eyes were lidded and his face downcast.
I wasn't in complete control of myself at the time.
The new werewolf inside of me didn't help. I walked over to him and set a hand on his arm.
He turned to me and managed a small smile. But here I am moaning about the past when you're the one who's in the worst trouble.
Asina is a formidable foe, and you're not even a werewolf. I grinned and shrugged.
I think I handled her well enough.
Anyway, let's get out of this creepy place before I get tempted to raid the fridge and find myself in a bottomless moat full of alligators.
Crocodiles, he corrected me.
I rolled my eyes, spun him around, and pushed him towards the bathroom.
Let's just get cleaned up and go.
We were ready in a few minutes, and with bags in hand, we tromped down the stairs to the lobby. Blake waited for us at the front door. A small smile graced his lips as he glanced from one of us to the other. Can I not convince you to stay for a short time and enjoy the wonders of my castle and island? He asked us. I looped my arm through one of David's and shook my head.
Not for all the wealth in the world. Any news on Asina?
David asked him. Blake shook his head.
Nothing.
She has disappeared, and my employee doesn't recall in which direction she traveled. His eyes flickered from David to me and back to my mate.
Under the circumstances, you are of course free to visit the island whenever you wish. It will give you some peace of mind.
David smiled.
Thanks for the offer, but there's no place like home.
Blake closed his eyes and bowed his head to us.
Very well. Until we meet again. Later, David returned.
We strode out the doors and out of that adventure, but more awaited us in the great mystery of future days.